You bow down to physical facts as if they were gods. When the bank statement arrives and the number is wrong, you do not question the number, you question yourself. When the rejection letter lands in your inbox, you do not challenge the verdict. You absorb it, internalize it, and begin to construct your entire identity around it. You surrender completely and without negotiation to a three-dimensional signal, treating it as though it were the final, irrevocable decree of the universe. But Neville Goddard, one of the most precise metaphysical architects who ever walked this earth, revealed a truth so terrifyingly powerful that most people will reject it on instinct. Facts are not sacred. They are not the voice of God. They are not destiny. They are simply the frozen, crystallized echoes of thoughts you have already thought, dead data masquerading as living truth. The 3D world you see around you is not the present. It is the past. It is a projection already in motion, cast from a mental film reel that has already finished spinning. And here is the command that changes everything. You do not have to accept it. You hold within your imagination a power so absolute, so architecturally supreme, that it can execute what this channel calls the reality override. A complete, systematic refusal to validate the physical evidence before you, and the deliberate installation of a new command directly into the server of your mind. When you learn to do this with precision, when you learn to completely ignore the testimony of your physical senses and hold your desired end with surgical, unwavering clarity, you do not merely hope for a different future. You bypass fate entirely. The physical world, governed by immutable law, has no alternative. It must crash, it must reboot, and it must render the new code you have installed. Consider the precise nature of your suffering for a moment. You are not suffering because your circumstances are powerful. You are suffering because you have been taught, systematically and relentlessly, to treat your circumstances as authoritative. From the moment you were old enough to read a number, you were conditioned to believe that the number was real, and your desire was fantasy, that the diagnosis was real, and your vision of health was wishful thinking, that the empty room was real, and the relationship you longed for was a dream. This conditioning runs so deep that it does not feel like a belief, it feels like common sense, and that is precisely why it functions as a prison. The bars are invisible because they are made of agreement, not iron. You have been agreeing moment by moment, day by day, with a version of reality that was assembled from your past, and you have been calling that agreement being responsible and facing reality. Neville Goddard called it something else entirely. He called it idolatry, the worship of a false god carved from the stone of yesterday's thinking. Here is the precise metaphor that will unlock this truth for you. Imagine you are trying to change what is displayed on a computer monitor. The screen is showing a file you do not want, an image of poverty, illness, or isolation, and your strategy, the strategy that the entire world has trained you to use, is to take a marker and draw on the glass. You are applying effort, intention, and energy directly to the surface of the screen. You are arguing with the screen. You are negotiating with the screen. You are crying in front of the screen, and nothing changes, because the image on the screen is not generated by the screen. The screen is simply the output device. The image is generated by the processor, by the code running beneath the surface, by the commands that have already been executed in the hidden architecture of the system. Drawing on the monitor with a marker is, by definition, useless. Not because you lack effort, but because you are applying your force to the wrong layer of the system entirely. Neville Goddard's entire teaching is a precise set of instructions for stepping away from the monitor and opening the command terminal, the imagination, where the actual code of your experienced reality is written, executed, and overridden. And this is the promise that Neville extends to you, not as a comfort, not as spiritual poetry, but as a statement of mechanical law. If you stop looking at the screen, if you withdraw your attention from the facts displayed on the surface of your 3D world, and if you open the command terminal of your imagination and install a new assumption with clarity and emotional conviction, you will overwrite the hard drive of reality. Not metaphorically, not eventually if you are lucky, or if the universe decides to be kind to you. Mechanically, inevitably. The physical world is not a fixed architecture. It is infinitely plastic, infinitely responsive, infinitely subject to the command of the imagination that holds it in form. The person who knows this, who truly knows it, not as an inspiring idea but as the operating principle of existence, is the person who has ceased to be a prisoner of facts and has become, in the fullest and most precise sense of the word, the architect of their own experienced reality. In this video, we are not going to talk about positive thinking. We are not going to discuss the importance of a good attitude or the value of gratitude journals. We are going to execute something far more radical, far more precise and far more demanding than any of that. We are going to execute what this channel calls the override protocol, a step-by-step, architecturally sound procedure for turning your back on physical reality with absolute deliberation and forcing a new destiny to render in its place. This is not a suggestion. This is not a philosophy for the comfortable hours of your life. This is the operating instruction for the moments when the facts are loudest, when the evidence against you is most overwhelming, and when every logical neuron in your brain is screaming at you to accept what you see. It is precisely in those moments that the override protocol is not just useful, it is the only tool that works. We will build this protocol together, layer by layer, until you possess it as a functional instrument of your will. But before we proceed, you must be warned about a mechanism that will attempt to destroy your override before it can complete its installation. There is a reflex, deeply wired, almost universal, that Neville Goddard identified as the single greatest enemy of manifested desire. This channel calls it the reality check trap, and it operates with devastating efficiency. Here is how it works. You complete your visualization. You feel the new reality with clarity and conviction. You install the new command with genuine emotional authority. And then, within minutes or hours, the logical mind initiates a verification sequence. It compels you to open the bank app, to check the inbox, to look out the window, to ask for signs. It frames this compulsion as wisdom. Erd calls it staying grounded and being realistic. But what you are actually doing in that moment of checking is submitting a query to the old system and accepting its output as the truth. You are aborting the installation mid-process. You are pulling the power cord from the server while the new files are still transferring. The result is not just failure, it is a reinforcement of the very fact you were attempting to override. We will dismantle this trap completely in Part 4, and I will give you the precise protocol for fasting from the physical world until the download is complete. For now, I ask one thing of you. In the comments below this video, input the command. Type the words, "I override reality." This is not a casual engagement prompt. This is the first act of the protocol, the deliberate, conscious declaration that you are choosing to exercise your authority as the thinker, the first cause, the operant power in your own experience. Type it now, and then remain here, because what follows is not information. It is initiation. To execute the reality override with the precision it demands, you must first understand the foundational distinction upon which Neville Goddard built his entire body of work, the distinction between a fact and a truth. These are not synonyms. They are not even cousins. They occupy entirely different levels of the architecture of existence, and confusing them is the primary reason that intelligent, earnest, spiritually curious people spend years engaging with these teachings without ever producing the results they seek. A fact in Neville's framework is a condition that exists in the three-dimensional sensory world. It is something you can see, touch, measure, photograph, or document. It has legal standing. It has social agreement. It has the weight of consensus reality behind it. And because of all of this, because of its apparent solidity, its apparent objectivity, its apparent independence from your wishes, you have been trained to treat it as the final authority on what is real. This training is the foundational error. This training is the source of your imprisonment. What Neville said, and said with the certainty of a geometer stating that the angles of a triangle sum to 180 degrees, is this: disregard the evidence of the senses. Not sometimes, not when the facts are mild and the stakes are low, always. And he went further, with a precision that leaves no room for comfortable interpretation. Facts are the enemies of truth. This is not a poetic provocation. This is a precise metaphysical statement about the structure of causality. A fact is an effect. It is the downstream consequence of a prior cause. It is the shadow cast by a thought that has already been thought, already been held, already been impressed upon the substance of the universal medium. When you look at a fact, you are not looking at reality as it is. You are looking at reality as it was, specifically as it was shaped by the pattern of thinking that preceded it. You are reading yesterday's newspaper and calling it today's weather forecast. Consider the precise mechanics of this. Every condition in your life, your financial situation, the state of your relationships, the condition of your body, the trajectory of your career, was not assembled by an external force and deposited into your experience without your participation. Each of these conditions is the material expression of a mental pattern that was held, consciously or unconsciously, with sufficient consistency and emotional conviction to impress itself upon the universal substance and cause that substance to take form. The form is the fact, the pattern is the cause. This is not philosophy. It is the operation of an immutable law, as consistent and as indifferent to your preferences as the law of gravity. A stone does not fall because gravity approves of it. A condition does not manifest because the universe endorses it. Both fall into place because the law operates without exception, without judgment, and without mercy toward ignorance. This understanding reframes everything. If a fact is simply a thought that has solidified, a mental pattern that has completed its journey from invisible cause to visible effect, then the fact is, by definition, already in the past. It was created then. It is merely being observed now. The moment of its creation, the moment when its trajectory was set, was not this moment of observation. It was the prior moment of mental causation. This means that when you stand before an unwanted fact and react to it with fear, with despair, with the instinctive acceptance that says, "This is my reality," you are not responding to the present. You are genuflecting before a monument to your past thinking. And worse, by reacting to it, by giving it your emotional energy and your focused attention, you are treating it as a cause rather than an effect. You are using it as the seed for the next cycle of creation. You are, in the most precise sense, voting for its continuation. The truth, in contrast, is an entirely different category of thing. The truth is not what is currently displayed on the screen of your physical world. The truth is what you hold right now, in the living architecture of your imagination. This is not a comforting reframe of wishful thinking. This is a precise statement about where creative power actually resides in the structure of existence. Neville was unambiguous. Imagination is not a faculty for entertaining fantasies. Imagination is the very workshop of God, the medium in which first cause operates, in which the blueprint is drawn, in which the pattern is established before it descends into material form. What you hold in your imagination is not a wish. It is a command issued to the universal substance, and the universal substance, governed by immutable law, will arrange itself to fulfill that command. Therefore, the truth is always more powerful than the fact, because the truth is cause, and the fact is effect. The truth in your imagination occupies a higher position in the causal hierarchy than any fact in your physical environment. This seems counterintuitive because the fact is visible and the truth is invisible. The fact has weight and texture, and the endorsement of a bank or a doctor or a court of law. The truth exists only in the privacy of your own mental world, and yet the invisible precedes the visible always and without exception, because the invisible is the blueprint, and the visible is merely the structure built from it. The building does not precede the architect's drawing. The harvest does not precede the seed. The effect does not precede the cause. And your physical world, every cubic inch of it, does not precede the mental pattern that commanded it into existence. Now apply this to the fact of poverty and the truth of wealth. If your bank account displays a number that defines you as poor, that number is a fact. It has timestamps and transaction histories and the institutional authority of a financial system behind it. It is, by every conventional standard, indisputably real. But Neville is asking you to see it as what it actually is, the solidified residue of a mental pattern that held a conception of insufficiency. It is not a prophecy. It is not a permanent sentence. It is not even a present tense reality. It is a past tense creation that has arrived with all its apparent authority into your current field of view. The truth, meanwhile, is the assumption of wealth that you are capable of holding in your imagination right now. The truth is the felt reality of financial abundance, the specific sensory texture of it, the emotional quality of it, the complete inner certainty of it, installed in the command terminal of your imagination with full authority and zero apology. And if Neville is correct and the law is as precise as he claims, then this truth, held with consistency and conviction, will destroy the fact. Not argue with it, not negotiate alongside it. Destroy it. The word destroy is deliberate and important. Neville did not teach a philosophy of coexistence between the imagined ideal and the physical condition. He did not teach you to hold your desired reality in mind while simultaneously making peace with your current reality. He taught that one must give way to the other because they cannot both be first cause simultaneously. Only one pattern can operate as the blueprint for the reality you experience, and whichever pattern you consistently invest with your belief and your feeling will be the one that the universal law executes. If you continue to give your emotional investment, your focused attention, and your private agreement to the fact, even while performing your visualizations, the fact remains the operative blueprint. You are not overriding anything. You are simply adding a secondary layer of mental activity on top of the existing command, and the existing command, being the one to which you have given the greater weight of your conviction, continues to execute. This is why Neville's instruction to disregard the evidence of the senses is not a casual directive to occasionally think positive thoughts. It is a complete architectural instruction to withdraw causative authority from the physical world and relocate it permanently and without apology in the imagination. The senses are instruments of reception. They receive the output of the creative process. They were never designed to serve as inputs to the creative process. When you allow the sensory data of your current conditions to determine the content of your inner world, to dictate your mood, your belief, your conception of what is possible, you have reversed the flow of causation entirely. You have made the effect into the cause. You have handed the keys of the kingdom to the janitor and told the king to take orders from him. This reversal is not a minor error in metaphysical procedure. It is the fundamental inversion of your function as a conscious being, and it is the precise source of every condition in your life that feels imposed upon you beyond your control and immune to your efforts to change it. Understand then what happens when the truth in your imagination is wealth and the fact before your eyes is poverty. You are holding two competing blueprints simultaneously. The question is not which one is real. Both are real at the level of mental activity. The question is which one you treat as the first cause, which one you invest with the quality of belief, of emotional certainty, of taken for granted truth. The one that receives that investment is the one that the law will execute. The law does not evaluate the content of the blueprint for its reasonableness, its current correspondence with physical reality, or its compatibility with what other people believe about you. The law executes the blueprint that the thinker holds as true, full stop. This is the mathematical certainty at the heart of Neville's teaching, and it is the precise reason why the reality override is not merely possible. It is mechanically inevitable for the person who executes it correctly. The 3D world you see around you is a delayed projection. The delay is not random. It corresponds to the time required for the universal substance to reorganize its physical expressions in correspondence with the new mental pattern. The delay is not evidence that the override has failed. It is evidence that the override is processing. Just as there is a lag between a server update and the moment your device displays the new version of an application, there is a lag between the installation of a new mental blueprint and the moment its physical correspondent appears in your sensory field. The critical error, the one that destroys more manifestations than any other single mistake, is interpreting this lag as failure. When you look at the physical world during the processing period and see that the old condition still appears, and you accept that appearance as evidence that your truth is not working, You have done something catastrophically precise. You have withdrawn your investment from the new blueprint and reinvested it in the old one. You have aborted the installation and restored the previous version. And the law, which is completely impartial and completely responsive, immediately recalibrates to the pattern you have now reaffirmed as your operative assumption. This is why the override protocol requires what Neville called the suspension of the reasoning mind, not as an act of intellectual recklessness, but as the precise and necessary discipline of a trained consciousness that understands the law. The reasoning mind, by its very nature, works with data. It assembles conclusions from evidence. It looks at the current state of the physical world and extrapolates from it. This is an extraordinarily useful faculty for navigating the material world once a new reality has already been established. But it is actively destructive when applied during the creative process, because the creative process requires you to assume the reality of something that has not yet appeared in the physical world, and the reasoning mind, given free rein, will immediately produce 17 arguments for why that assumption is unreasonable, dangerous, and delusional. Every one of those arguments, however logically valid it may appear, is itself a blueprint. Every one of those arguments is a command to the universal substance to continue producing the condition that the reasoning mind is treating as fixed and immutable. The reasoning mind, when applied prematurely, is the most efficient machine for manufacturing your own imprisonment that the universe has ever devised. What then is the correct relationship between the thinker and the fact? It is precisely the relationship between the architect and the existing building that he intends to demolish and rebuild. The architect does not argue with the existing building. He does not attempt to persuade the building to change shape. He does not despair at the size and solidity of the existing structure. He turns to his drawing board, produces the blueprint of the new structure with absolute precision and authority, and hands that blueprint to the construction process, knowing that the existing building will be cleared and the new one erected in accordance with his design. The existing building is a fact. The new design is the truth. The architect's work is to hold the truth with such clarity and conviction that the construction process, the universal law, can execute it without interference from the thinker's own doubt and hesitation. You are the architect. The facts are the existing structure. The reality override is the new blueprint, and the law is the construction crew that will execute it the moment you stop interfering with their work, by continuing to stare at the building you want demolished. Neville's declaration, then, resolves into something of extraordinary precision. The truth in your imagination is always more real than the fact before your eyes, because the truth is where creation happens, and the fact is where creation has already happened. You are not choosing between a wish and a reality. You are choosing between two realities, one that belongs to your past and one that belongs to your future, and deciding which one to give the authority of your present tense belief. This is the override. This is the command. This is the precise mechanism by which every condition in your life that you have ever successfully changed was changed, whether you were conscious of it or not. The purpose of this teaching is to make you conscious of it, to give you deliberate command of a process that has been operating in your life without your supervision for as long as you have been alive, producing results that seemed random or fated but were, in every case, the mathematically precise output of the mental patterns you were unconsciously holding as your operative truth. To ignore the evidence of your senses, then, is not an act of denial. It is not a psychological trick for managing anxiety or maintaining optimism in difficult circumstances. It is the most sophisticated act available to a conscious being, the act of reaching past the effect to work directly with the cause, past the projection to work directly with the projector, past the screen to work directly with the code. When you disregard a fact, you are not pretending it does not exist. You are correctly classifying it as a past tense creation, stripping it of its false authority over your present tense creative activity, and redirecting your creative power to the installation of the blueprint you have chosen. This is the full meaning of disregard the evidence of the senses. This is the architecture of the truth. And this is the foundation upon which everything that follows in this video is built. With the distinction between fact and truth now established at its full architectural depth, we can proceed to the second pillar of the foundation, the logical structure that makes the reality override not just philosophically coherent, but mechanically inevitable. The skeptical mind will have already begun formulating its objections. This sounds like ignoring your problems, it will say. This sounds irresponsible. This sounds like the thinking of someone who has lost touch with reality. These objections are predictable, and they deserve a precise answer, not a reassurance, but a logical demolition. To deliver that demolition, consider the most universally understood modern metaphor for the relationship between cause and effect, the architecture of a software system. Specifically, consider what happens when a technology company decides to update an application that is currently running on millions of devices around the world. The old version of the application is active. It is running on your phone right now. You are using it. It has its features, its limitations, its bugs, its particular way of rendering information on your screen. From the perspective of the user, this application is the current reality. It is what exists. Now the engineers at the company's headquarters have written an entirely new version, a fundamentally different code base with new features, new architecture, and the removal of the old bugs. This new version exists on the company's server. It is complete, it is functional, it is ready. But the user's phone still shows the old version because the update has not yet been pushed. The old version continues to run because no override command has been issued. The new version, despite being complete and superior and existing on the server, has zero presence in the user's experience until the override is executed. This is the precise structural analogy for your situation. The physical world around you, your bank account, your relationship status, your career trajectory, your body, is the old version of the application currently running on the device of your experience. It is active. It is rendering information on the screen of your senses, but it is not the final version. It is not the only version. It is simply the version that has been installed, and it continues to run, not because it is permanent, but because no override command has been issued from the server. Your imagination is the server. The new assumption you hold in your imagination, the wealthy version, the healthy version, the loved and successful version, is the new code base, sitting complete and ready on the server, waiting for the override to push it to the device of your physical experience. The physical world will continue displaying the old version for exactly as long as you continue to withhold the override command. Now examine what happens when the override is executed. The engineer at the server, the thinker in imagination, does not need to negotiate with the old application. She does not need to persuade it to change its code from within. She does not need to argue with the bugs or petition the outdated interface to modernize itself. She simply pushes the update from the server and the device receives the new files. There may be a moment of processing, a loading screen, a brief period of transition during which the old version is being cleared and the new one installed. But this processing period is not evidence that the update has failed. It is the mechanical consequence of a successful override command propagating through the system. The engineer does not, during this processing period, look at the loading screen and conclude that her new code was wrong. She does not withdraw the update and reinstall the old version because the transition is taking a few seconds. She knows that the system is operating exactly as it should, that the new files are transferring, and that the moment the installation is complete, the device will display the new version with mathematical certainty. Apply this with exact precision to the human creative process. When you install a new assumption in your imagination, when you lock in the felt reality of your desired end with complete clarity and genuine emotional conviction, you have issued the override command from the server. The new code has been pushed, but the physical world, which is the device receiving the update, does not instantly and instantaneously redisplay a new reality. There is a processing period. The old conditions continue to appear on the screen of your senses during this period. The loading screen is still showing, and the reasoning mind, which has been trained to evaluate reality by reading the screen, looks at the loading screen and declares, "Nothing has changed. The override has failed. The old version is still running." This conclusion, despite being logically coherent from the perspective of screen reading, is factually wrong from the perspective of system architecture. The override has not failed. The installation is in progress. The conditions you see are not evidence of a permanent state. They are the temporary appearance of a transition already underway. The unshakable logic of this analogy extends to a critical question. What happens if the user, during the processing period, attempts to intervene? What if they try to resist the update, repeatedly reopening the old app, refusing to allow the new files to complete their installation? The result is precisely what you would expect. The update is interrupted, the installation is incomplete, and the device continues to run the old version indefinitely. Not because the new version was flawed, but because the intervention prevented the installation from completing. This is exactly what happens when you execute a mental override and then immediately engage in what Neville would call checking the results. Every time you look at the physical world with the question, has it worked yet? And every time you allow the unchanged physical conditions to register as evidence of failure, you are pulling the user's hand across the screen during the update installation. You are not checking the results. You are creating them. You are reinstalling the old version with your own act of attention. The server update analogy also illuminates a subtler point that is easy to miss. The server does not push incomplete code. When the thinker installs a new assumption in imagination with genuine clarity, full sensory detail, and the complete emotional conviction of one who has already received the thing desired, the blueprint that is transmitted to the universal substance is not tentative or partial. It is the complete specification for the new reality. The universal law does not receive it and then decide whether to comply based on current physical conditions. The law executes the blueprint because that is the precise nature of what the law does. It is not evaluating the reasonableness of the specification. It is not checking whether the current physical conditions support the desired outcome. It is executing the command. This is what Neville means when he says, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. He is giving you the precise technical specification for issuing the override command. Not a partial assumption, not a hopeful assumption, not an I'll try to believe this assumption, but the full-bodied, sensory-complete, emotionally saturated assumption of the wish already fulfilled. Consider now the implication for those conditions in your life that have felt most permanent, most entrenched, most immune to change. The bankruptcy that has persisted for years, the illness that has defied treatment, the loneliness that has resisted every social effort. From the screen reading perspective, these are the most powerful facts in your experience. They have duration, they have documentation, they have the accumulated weight of years of validation behind them. But from the server architecture perspective, they are simply old applications that have been running without challenge for a long time. Not because they are more deeply embedded in the nature of reality, but because the override command has never been issued with sufficient clarity and sustained conviction to complete the installation. The length of time a condition has persisted does not increase its resistance to the override. A bug that has been in the code for 10 years is no more difficult to overwrite than one that appeared last week. The code is the code. The update is the update. The law is the law. Duration is irrelevant to the architecture of causation. This is a statement that the reasoning mind will struggle with enormously because the reasoning mind measures probability by duration and frequency. It says, this condition has been present for 20 years, therefore it is deeply rooted and highly resistant to change. Neville's logic says, this condition has been present for 20 years, because for 20 years, the same blueprint has been transmitted to the universal substance without a successful override being installed. The condition is not resistant, it is simply being continuously recreated by the uninterrupted operation of the old blueprint. The moment a new blueprint is installed with sufficient authority, with the full unambiguous override command of a thinker who has withdrawn all investment from the old fact and relocated that investment entirely into the new truth, the process of recreation for the old condition ceases, and the process of creation for the new condition begins. Time does not factor into this equation. Accumulated physical evidence does not factor into this equation. What factors into this equation, and only this, is the quality of the command issued from the server of imagination. There is one more dimension of this logic that must be established before we proceed to the architecture of the protocol. The law is not selective in what it executes. It does not evaluate the moral merit of the blueprint, the social desirability of the desired outcome, or the current physical probability of the result. It executes. This means that the same law that is currently executing your unwanted conditions is the same law that will execute your desired ones the moment you issue the override. The law is not against you. The law has never been against you. The law has been faithfully, impartially, and with mathematical precision executing exactly what you have been transmitting from the server of your imagination, including all the unconscious transmissions, all the fear-based patterns, all the assumptions of unworthiness and limitation that you have been broadcasting without knowing you were broadcasting them. The law is your most loyal servant. It has never disobeyed a single instruction you have ever given it. The problem has never been the law. The problem has been the instructions. And the reality override is the process of issuing new ones. The unshakable logic of this system can now be stated with complete precision. Reality is not a fixed structure that resists the wishes of the individual. Reality is a responsive system that executes the commands of the thinker with mechanical faithfulness. The facts you see around you are the accumulated output of commands you have already issued, consciously or otherwise. The truth you hold in imagination is the new command you are now issuing deliberately. Because the law is consistent, because it executes without prejudice, and because there is no physical fact so entrenched that it can override a new command issued from the supreme authority of the thinker's deliberate and sustained imagination, the override is not a gamble. It is not a prayer. It is not a spiritual experiment whose outcome remains to be seen. It is a logical consequence. It is the inevitable result of a cause that has been correctly and completely initiated. The physical world will comply. It has no alternative. It never has. The application of this logic to your present circumstances is straightforward. Whatever facts currently dominate your experience, whatever conditions you have been treating as permanent, as defining, as the parameters within which you must construct whatever happiness you can manage, those facts are old code. They are the previous version of the application. They are running right now on the device of your experience, not because they are the truth about you, but because no override has yet been installed with sufficient authority and sustained commitment to complete the installation. You have perhaps attempted the visualization. You have perhaps spent a few minutes imagining a better outcome, but you have consistently, reliably, and with socially endorsed predictability looked back at the screen of your physical world and accepted its output as the definitive statement of what is real. And in doing so, you have perpetually reinstalled the old version. This video is the moment that changes. The protocol you are about to receive is the technical specification for executing the override correctly, completely, sustainably, and without the self-sabotage of the reality check trap. Pay precise attention to every step. With the foundations of fact versus truth and the unshakable server update logic now fully established, we can proceed to the precise operational architecture of the override protocol. And the first requirement is not a technique. It is a state of consciousness that must be cultivated before any technique can function at its full power. Because the law is precise, it does not execute commands that are diluted by conflicting inputs. If your imagination is attempting to install the new blueprint while your senses are simultaneously feeding the old data into your awareness with full emotional weight, you are transmitting two competing commands to the universal substance simultaneously. The result is not a partial override. The result is a stalemate, and a stalemate over time has a winner, because the old pattern has the advantage of duration, familiarity, and the enormous gravitational pull of all the evidence that supports it. The new pattern, unless it is held in an environment free from the continuous interference of sensory contradiction, will eventually be overwhelmed. This is why the first step of the architecture is not about imagination. It is about fasting. Neville Goddard used the word fast in a way that will permanently alter your understanding of it. In every tradition, in every culture, the fast has been presented as the abstinence from food, the physical discipline of denying the body its ordinary sustenance for a prescribed period of time. Religious traditions have invested this practice with enormous spiritual significance. But Neville, with the precision of a master surgeon cutting through centuries of accumulated ritual to expose the principle beneath, declared that the true fast, the fast that actually possesses transformative power, has nothing whatsoever to do with food. The true fast is the deliberate, disciplined abstinence from negative sensory data. It is the intentional act of starving a problem of your attention. It is the practice of withdrawing the sustenance of your awareness from every condition, every thought, every conversation, and every piece of evidence that supports the reality you are attempting to override. This is not a metaphor for fasting. This is what fasting was always pointing toward. The physical fast was the instruction manual for a mental practice that operates at the level of first cause. Consider what food is at its most fundamental level. It is fuel. It is the substance that sustains and enables biological processes to continue operating. Remove the food, and those processes, deprived of their sustenance, begin to slow, weaken, and eventually cease. The physical fast is a demonstration at the level of the body of a universal principle. That which is deprived of sustenance cannot maintain its current form. Now apply this principle to a mental condition, to a fact that exists in your experience as an unwanted reality. What sustains a fact? What is the fuel that enables it to continue exerting its presence in your experience? The answer is your attention. Specifically, your focused, emotionally charged, belief-laden attention. Every time you look at an unwanted condition and react to it with the energy of fear, frustration, despair, or obsessive problem-solving, you are feeding it. You are providing it with the precise energetic sustenance it requires to continue its existence in your experience. You are, in the most literal sense of the metaphysical principle, nourishing the very thing you wish to dissolve. This is not poetic language. This is a precise description of how the creative process operates in reverse, how the things you least desire are maintained and even amplified by the attention you give them in the course of trying to eliminate them. The physician who diagnoses the illness and spends every waking hour researching symptoms, monitoring indicators, and discussing the condition with specialists is not necessarily healing themselves through diligence. In many cases, they are sustaining the mental blueprint of the illness through the sheer intensity of their focus upon it. The entrepreneur who lies awake analyzing the debt, calculating the shortfall, and projecting the worst-case scenarios is not solving their financial problem through diligence. They are feeding the blueprint of financial insufficiency with the most potent creative fuel available: late-night, emotionally saturated, fear-driven attention. The law does not distinguish between deliberate and accidental creation. It executes the dominant pattern. And for most people, the dominant pattern is whatever they are most intently focused upon, which all too frequently is precisely what they least want to experience. The true fast, therefore, is the precise and disciplined practice of denying this fuel to the conditions you are overriding. It is not about pretending the conditions do not exist at a physical level. It is about refusing to give them the emotional, attentional, and belief-based investment that would allow them to continue operating as the dominant pattern in your creative process. This distinction is critical. The true fast does not require you to become dishonest about your physical circumstances in the presence of others, or to abandon practical responsibilities. It requires something far more specific and far more challenging. It requires you to encounter those circumstances, to see the bank statement, to receive the difficult news, to observe the unchanged physical condition, and to refuse, in the privacy of your own inner world, to treat that encounter as a causative event. You see the fact, you process its practical implications, but you do not give it the status of blueprint. You do not allow it to overwrite the assumption you are holding in imagination. You treat it as what it actually is, old data from a system that is currently in the process of being updated. In practical terms, the true fast operates across multiple dimensions of your daily experience. The most obvious dimension is the discipline of not voluntarily consuming more negative sensory data about the condition you are overriding. If you are overriding financial lack, you stop spending unproductive hours reviewing statements that reinforce the narrative of insufficiency. If you are overriding a health condition, you stop immersing yourself in content, forums, articles, conversations that catalogs the frightening possibilities associated with that condition. This is not irresponsibility. This is the precise act of starving a pattern of its sustenance. The second dimension is more challenging. It is the discipline of your private inner conversation, the continuous mental monologue that runs beneath your conscious activities throughout the day. For most people, this inner conversation is a constant rehearsal of their unwanted conditions, their anxieties about those conditions, and their predictions of negative outcomes. This inner conversation is the most persistent and powerful source of creative input that exists, precisely because it operates continuously, largely below the threshold of conscious examination, and with the immediacy and emotional weight of apparently factual self-assessment. Fasting from this inner conversation, substituting it deliberately and repeatedly with the inner narrative of the override, is the deep work of the true fast, and it is the practice that, when sustained, makes the eventual physical manifestation not merely possible but inevitable. The third dimension of the true fast concerns your verbal outputs, what you say about your situation to other people. This dimension is frequently overlooked in discussions of manifestation because it appears to be merely behavioral rather than causative. But verbal expression is not separate from the creative process. It is, in a very precise sense, an extension of your inner blueprint. It is the moment when an inner pattern is given additional energy through articulation, agreement-seeking, and the social reinforcement of shared reality. When you describe your unwanted condition to another person, when you explain how bad your situation is, how long it has persisted, how serious it looks, you are not simply communicating information. You are performing a ritual of validation for the old blueprint. You are giving it social substance, social agreement, and social momentum. Neville's instruction here is unambiguous, and it is one of his most difficult teachings to follow because it runs counter to every social norm of intimacy and honesty. Do not speak of the facts. Speak only of the override. If you must speak, speak from within the new assumption. Speak as the person who has already received the desired outcome. Speak from the end, not from the middle. Because the law listens to what you speak with belief, and it will construct your experience in correspondence with the pattern embedded in your habitual speech. There is a dimension of the true fast that operates even more subtly, the dimension of emotional consumption. Human beings constantly consume emotional content, news, entertainment, social media, conversation, ambient cultural material. Each piece of this content is not merely received passively. It is processed through your personal associative network and connected to your existing patterns. If the emotional content you are consuming is saturated with narratives of scarcity, danger, failure, and victimhood, that content is not merely informing you about the world. It is actively feeding the emotional atmosphere in which your creative process operates. The true fast, at its deepest level, includes a deliberate audit and adjustment of your emotional diet, not as a withdrawal from life, but as the precise recognition that your creative output is directly shaped by your emotional input, and that a thinker who is serious about executing a reality override cannot afford to continuously nourish the emotional soil of the old blueprint while simultaneously attempting to grow a new one. The soil and the seed must be aligned. The fast is the process of aligning them. The duration and intensity of the true fast is calibrated to the magnitude and entrenchment of the condition being overridden. A long-standing, deeply validated pattern, one that has been reinforced by years of physical evidence, social agreement, and continuous inner repetition, requires a more sustained and intensive fast than a recent and superficially held one. This is not because the law is harder to override for large problems than for small ones. The law is equally responsive regardless of scale. The calibration is about the thinker, not the law. A more entrenched pattern has a more deeply carved channel in the thinker's habitual mental and emotional life, and filling that channel with new material and allowing it to solidify requires more sustained and consistent application of the new blueprint. The fast must be long enough and deep enough to allow the new pattern to achieve the kind of dominance that the old one has held, not by competition, but by the progressive withdrawal of all sustenance from the old pattern and the simultaneous consistent feeding of the new one. When this tipping point is reached, when the new blueprint has become the dominant, habitual, taken-for-granted assumption of the thinker, the physical manifestation follows with the same mathematical certainty as the harvest follows the planting of a seed in prepared, watered, and well-tended soil. The true fast is not a temporary discipline. It is a permanent reorientation of where you locate creative authority. It is the foundational practice of a thinker who has understood the structure of causation and has decided with full deliberateness to exercise their creative power at the level of cause rather than reacting perpetually and helplessly at the level of effect. The thinker who has mastered the true fast is not a person who has no problems. They are a person who encounters problems with a categorically different inner response, not the automatic surrender and validation of the conditioned mind, but the immediate recognition of old data, the swift and compassionate refusal to feed that data with causative attention, and the deliberate redirection of creative investment to the blueprint of the desired outcome. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is the highest form of practical intelligence available to a conscious being, and it is the required state of preparation for the execution of the override protocol, the three-step architectural procedure that we are now ready to enter. Step 1 of the override protocol is the disconnection. Before any new data can be installed in the creative server of your imagination, the current input stream must be deliberately and completely severed. This is not a figure of speech. It is a specific operational instruction that must be executed with physical as well as mental deliberateness. Begin by physically isolating yourself. Find a location where external sensory interruptions are minimized, a quiet room, a private space. The physical environment you choose is not merely a comfort preference, it is a practical architectural necessity, because the sensory environment in which you operate continuously generates inputs that your mind processes, consciously or unconsciously, and those inputs carry with them the associative weight of your current physical reality. The sound of the street outside your window, the visual details of the room you are sitting in, your desk, your bills, your belongings. These are not neutral data. They are continuous reminders of the 3D reality whose authority you are attempting to withdraw. To execute the override at full power, you must first remove yourself from the signal. Close your eyes. This simple physical act is far more consequential than it appears, because the visual field is the primary channel through which the 3D world asserts its claims on your awareness. When your eyes are open, you are continuously receiving sensory confirmation that the physical world is real, that it is present, and that its configurations are the relevant facts of your existence. Closing your eyes does not merely reduce visual input. It signals to the entire neurological system a shift from the receptive mode, in which the senses are oriented outward toward the physical environment, to the generative mode, in which awareness turns inward toward the creative architecture of the imagination. This inward turn is not a withdrawal from reality. It is, in the precise framework of Neville's teaching, the entry into the only level of reality at which creative causation can be exercised. You are not escaping into fantasy. You are stepping from the output layer of the system into the input layer, from the screen into the terminal. Beyond the physical act of closing your eyes and isolating yourself, the disconnection requires a deeper withdrawal, a deliberate step-by-step disinvestment of your awareness from the specific contents of your current physical life. This means the debt. This means the diagnosis. This means the rejection. This means the empty bank account and the unwanted relationship status and the career that has stalled. You must withdraw your awareness from each of these not through willpower-based suppression, but through the specific technique of deliberate spatial and temporal displacement. In your mind, you are not in the room you have just closed your eyes in. You are somewhere else. When, who. All of these coordinates are being reset. The consciousness that is currently executing the override is not the consciousness that is burdened by the history of those unwanted conditions. It is a consciousness that has stepped back, behind, and beyond those conditions to the level at which it existed before the current blueprint was installed. Pure, free, unencumbered. and possessed of the full creative authority of the thinker before the world has told it what to think. Enter this void deliberately. Hold it for as long as it takes for the gravitational pull of the 3D world to loosen its grip on your awareness. This is the disconnection. When it is complete, you are standing in the command terminal with a clear input field and a cursor that awaits the new code. Step 2 of the override protocol is the injection, the installation of the new data directly into the creative architecture of your imagination. This is the step that most people believe they understand, and most people execute incompletely. The instruction is not to think about the desired outcome. Thinking about the desired outcome is a cognitive activity that occurs at a certain remove from the thing thought about. It involves the conceptual mind observing an idea of the desired reality from the outside, turning it over analytically, considering its details, appreciating its merits. This is not the override. The injection requires you to step inside the desired reality, to occupy it from the inside, as though it were your actual present tense experience. Neville's language for this is precise and repeatedly stated. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not the thought of the wish fulfilled, the feeling, the felt reality, the complete sensory, emotionally saturated experience of being the person who has already received, already achieved, already become the thing that the fact currently says is beyond your reach. Construct the scene with surgical precision. If the fact you are overriding is unemployment, if the current code running on the device of your experience says that you have been fired, that you are without income, that your professional identity has been reduced to a gap in your resume, then the override scene is not a vague sense of things being better. The override is sitting at the desk of your own successful company, and not thinking about that desk from outside it, sitting at it. Feel the specific material texture of the wood beneath your hands. Is it polished? Is it wide and heavy and solid in the way that successful things are solid? Feel the chair supporting you, the quality of it, the way it fits the body of a person who has built something real. Look around the room you are in. Not the room you actually closed your eyes in, but the room of the override. What do you see? The details of your environment communicate to every sensory register of your consciousness, whether this is real or not, and it is in the accumulation of specific, vivid, personally resonant detail that the installation achieves its full power. Generic scenes produce generic results, because a generic scene does not have the sensory completeness to fully engage the imagination as a lived experience rather than a thought experiment. Hear the sounds of the override. If the fact is rejection, a relationship that has ended, a partnership that has dissolved, the sound component of the override is not silence. It is the specific voice of the person whose presence you desire, saying something to you that they would only say in the context of the reality you have chosen. Not just imagined words, but the specific timbre, the specific warmth, the specific quality of a voice that has reached you through the medium of actual love and actual presence. If the override is financial, if the fact is bankruptcy and the truth is abundance, then hear the word congratulations spoken by someone whose opinion you respect in the context of a success that is specifically yours. The auditory component of the injection is frequently underutilized, and yet it is one of the most direct pathways to the emotional conviction that makes the override operative. We are auditory creatures at the deepest levels of our emotional processing, and a scene that contains a specific, resonant, personally meaningful sound, a sound that belongs exclusively to the desired reality, can achieve the shift of feeling that makes the installation complete in a way that purely visual scenes sometimes cannot. Make it vivid, make it specific, make it irrevocably yours. And then, and this is the precise technical requirement that distinguishes a successful injection from a pleasant visualization exercise, allow the feeling of the scene to fully permeate you. Allow the emotional reality of having arrived, having received, having become to fill your entire inner world. This feeling is not a decoration added to the mental scene. This feeling is the operative element of the override. It is the emotional signal that the thinker transmits to the universal substance. The signal that says, this is real, this is now, this is the blueprint that is to be executed. The imagination provides the specific form. The feeling provides the creative force that impresses that form upon the substance. Without the specific form, the creative force has no direction. Without the creative force, the specific form has no power to impress itself. The injection requires both, operating simultaneously, in the state of full sensory immersion that Neville calls the feeling of the wish fulfilled. When you achieve this, when you are genuinely inside the scene, feeling it, living it, breathing it, the override has been issued. The new code is on the server. The update has been pushed. The installation is in progress. Step 3 of the override protocol is the sustained boot, and this is the step that will confront you with the most direct test of your commitment to the override. You open your eyes. The room is still the same room. The physical world outside your window has not instantly rearranged itself to display the new reality you have just installed. The debt has not disappeared. The relationship has not suddenly healed. The career has not been instantly transformed. Everything looks exactly as it did before you closed your eyes. This is the test. Not because the override has failed, it has not. The installation is in progress. The new blueprint has been transmitted. The law is already at work executing the update. This is the test, because the old application is still displaying on the screen, and the conditioned mind, trained by a lifetime of screen reading, will interpret the unchanged display as definitive evidence of failure. Everything in your nervous system that has been trained to accept physical evidence as the final authority on what is real will, in this moment, mount its most compelling case for surrender. This is the exact moment at which the override is won or lost. The instruction for the sustained boot is this: do not accept the physical room. Not aggressively, not with the white-knuckled effort of someone trying to pretend the room is different, but with the calm authority of an engineer who has issued an update command and knows with mechanical certainty that the device is processing. Open your eyes and move through the physical space before you. Walk through your physical house, your physical apartment, your physical environment. But in the architecture of your consciousness, walk through the override. Walk through the mansion while standing in the modest room. Walk through the successful company while standing in the empty office. Walk through the abundant life while moving through the current one. This is the double exposure that Neville describes, the simultaneous occupation of both the physical and the imagined, with the imagined functioning as the inner reality and the physical functioning as the temporary loading screen. The double exposure is sustained not because the physical is being denied, but because the override has been given permanent precedence over the physical in the hierarchy of what you treat as your operative truth. This sustained boot is not a brief exercise. It is a way of walking through your day. It is the continuous background-level maintenance of the new blueprint as the dominant assumption of your consciousness, even as the physical world continues to display the old version during the processing period. Every time the old conditions present themselves to your awareness, every time the bank app is opened and the old number is visible, every time the inbox contains the unchanged correspondence, every time the body reports the unchanged symptom, the sustained boot is the practice of encountering that data, acknowledging its presence in the physical field, and then returning immediately and without drama to the inner reality of the override. Not reacting, not suppressing, not arguing. Simply seeing the old screen, recognizing it as the loading screen of an update already in progress, and continuing to walk in the consciousness of the override. The physical world will conform. It has no alternative, but it will conform on its own schedule, through the mechanics of the law. And the sustained boot is the practice that maintains the integrity of the override command throughout that schedule, regardless of how long the loading screen appears. When you walk through a physical space in the sustained boot, the quality of your sensory engagement with that space shifts. You are not looking at the space to receive information about your current reality. You are moving through the space as someone whose inner reality is the override. And this inner orientation gradually begins to affect your outer perceptions in ways that are not mystical, but neurological. The people you encounter begin to appear differently to you because you are encountering them as the person in the override. The conversations you have take different directions because you are conducting them from within a different inner architecture. The opportunities that appear in your peripheral vision, the phone call you almost don't take, the article you almost don't read, the conversation you almost walk past, begin to align with the override because your reticular activating system, recalibrated by the new dominant assumption, has begun filtering your perceptual field to highlight what matches the new blueprint. The physical world is conforming, not in a single dramatic moment, but through the gradual accumulation of new correspondences that could not have appeared under the old blueprint, because the old blueprint had trained your perception to be blind to them. The sustained boot continues until the physical world has fully rendered the override. Until then, every moment of every day is an opportunity either to reinforce the new blueprint or to reinstall the old one. Every thought, every conversation, every reaction to the evidence of the senses is a vote, a creative act that adds its weight either to the override or to the fact. The thinker who understands this, who has genuinely internalized the architectural reality that thought is cause and circumstance is effect, will stop reacting to circumstances as though they were causative, and will start monitoring their own mental and emotional outputs as the actual creative process that is assembling the next version of their experienced reality. The sustained boot is not a technique you do in the morning and then set aside. It is the operating mode of the initiated consciousness, the mode in which the thinker walks through the world not as a subject of external forces, but as the architect of a reality that is continuously under construction according to the blueprint they are holding in the command terminal of their imagination. The override protocol, then, is a complete operational sequence, the disconnection, which clears the input stream and establishes the pure creative state. The injection, which installs the new blueprint with full sensory and emotional authority, and the sustained boot, which maintains the new blueprint as the dominant assumption of the thinker's consciousness throughout the processing period, regardless of what the loading screen of physical reality continues to display. These three steps are not separate practices to be alternated. They are a continuous arc, a movement from the withdrawal of creative authority from the physical world through the deliberate investment of that authority in the chosen desired reality, to the sustained carrying of that invested authority through the daily encounter with the physical world in its current loading screen state. When this arc is executed completely, correctly, and without the interruption of the reality check trap, without the act of fact-checking that aborts the installation, the physical world must comply. Not because magic has occurred, but because the law has operated, as it always does, with mathematical certainty, in precise correspondence with the blueprint held by the thinker. Now, having established both the theoretical foundation and the operational architecture of the override protocol, we must turn to the dimension of this teaching that destroys more successful overrides than any other single factor, the dimension of fatal mistakes. Because the protocol is simple in its structure, but demanding in its execution, and the human mind, trained by decades of sensory subservience, will attempt to sabotage the override at every stage with mechanisms that feel not like sabotage, but like wisdom, maturity, and common sense. The most dangerous of these mechanisms, the one Neville identified most specifically and most urgently, is the one we warned you about in the opening of this video. It is the reality check trap, and it is time to dismantle it completely. The fatal mistake that kills more reality overrides than any other is so common, so universally practiced, and so deeply embedded in the habits of the reasonable mind that most people do not even recognize it as a mistake. They recognize it as diligence, they practice it as responsibility, they recommend it to others as wisdom. It is the act of checking for results, the compulsive, repetitive, anxiety-driven monitoring of the physical world for evidence that the override has taken effect. You have done the visualization. You have sat in the silence, constructed the scene, achieved the feeling. For a few minutes, perhaps even for an hour, you genuinely inhabited the override. You felt the desk of your successful company beneath your hands, or you heard the congratulations, or you felt the solidity of the loved relationship. The feeling was real. The installation felt complete. And then you opened your eyes, the physical world resumed its unchanged display, And the reasoning mind, operating precisely as it was designed to, said, "All right, you've done your exercise. Now let's see if it worked." And you checked the bank app. This act in checking the bank app is not a neutral behavior. It is not a harmless data collection exercise. It is a creative act of the first order, performed with enormous precision and devastating effectiveness. Here is the precise mechanics of what happens when you check for results after performing an override. In the moment of checking, you are submitting a query to the physical system, and you are doing so with a specific felt question embedded in the act. Is it different yet? This question contains within it a complete statement of your current operative assumption, and that assumption is the continuation of the fact. The question, "Is it different yet?" presupposes that, as of this moment of checking, you believe it may not be different. It presupposes that the physical evidence before you will function as the arbiter of whether the override has succeeded. It presupposes that the output of the 3D world holds authority over the blueprint of the imagination. Every one of these presuppositions is a creative transmission to the universal substance. Every one of them is a vote for the old blueprint, and the law which executes the dominant pattern with complete impartiality registers these transmissions and calibrates the next cycle of creation accordingly. But the damage does not stop at the act of checking. It extends to what follows. You check the bank app and the number is unchanged. In this moment, this specific, decisive, terrifyingly ordinary moment, what do you feel? If you are honest with yourself, what arises in the body and the emotional field is something in the family of confirmation. I knew it. Nothing changed. It didn't work. This feeling, this precise, emotionally rich sensation of confirmed failure, is the most potent creative fuel you have generated all day. It is more powerful as a creative input than the feeling you achieved during your visualization, because it is not imagined. It is registered by the senses as a real event and processed by the emotional body with the full weight of apparent fact. The feeling of confirmed failure, arising from the act of checking for results and finding the physical world unchanged, is the override being aborted and the old blueprint being reinstalled with maximum force and maximum emotional conviction. You have not merely failed to override the condition. You have, in the act of checking, strengthened it. Neville's prescription for this trap is articulated in one of his most famous and most demanding instructions. You must walk by faith, not by sight. In the context of the override protocol, this is not a religious instruction. It is a precise operational directive for the management of the thinker's creative process during the processing period. Walking by faith means maintaining the inner reality of the override as the operative assumption of your consciousness, without requiring the physical world to confirm it before granting it the status of real. It means treating the override as already accomplished, not as something you are waiting to see evidence of, but as something whose completion you are confident of to the same degree that you are confident the sun will rise tomorrow. The confidence is not based on sensory evidence, because the sun has not yet risen. The confidence is based on the known operating principle of the system, the law, which is as reliable as the law that governs the movement of celestial bodies. You do not check to see if the sun has risen at midnight and conclude from its absence that it will not rise tomorrow. You know the law, and you act in correspondence with it. The override is the same. You know the law. You have issued the command. You do not check the loading screen for progress updates. You walk in the authority of that knowledge through the processing period. The second fatal mistake is more socially embedded and therefore more insidious than the result-checking trap. It is the practice of complaining about what is, the habitual, socially encouraged, apparently harmless act of describing your current unwanted circumstances to other people. You meet a friend for coffee. They ask how you are doing, and because they are your friend, because social intimacy involves the sharing of difficulty, because you have been carrying the weight of the unchanged condition for days or weeks, and the relief of expressing it is palpable, you tell them. You describe the debt. You describe how bad it has gotten. You explain the numbers. You share the details of the rejection, the specifics of the health concern, the precise dimensions of the problem that is pressing down on you. And your friend listens and nods, and perhaps offers sympathy, and perhaps offers their own parallel stories of difficulty. And you go home feeling heard, but the condition has not changed. It has, in fact, subtly but measurably solidified. What has happened in this exchange is precisely what Neville warned against when he said, "If you speak of the facts, you give them life." This is not hyperbole. It is a precise description of the creative process operating through the medium of speech. When you articulate an unwanted condition to another person, you are not merely communicating information, you are performing several creative acts simultaneously. You are activating the pattern in your own consciousness with greater specificity and emotional detail than you might have done in silence. You are seeking and receiving social confirmation of the reality of the condition. And social confirmation is a form of creative agreement that adds weight to the blueprint of the condition. You are rehearsing the narrative of the condition, strengthening its neural pathways in your own mind, and making it more immediately available as the default story you tell about your current reality. Each of these acts feeds the old blueprint. Each of them is a creative investment in the continuation of the condition. The fact that the investment is made casually, in the context of friendship and mutual support, does not reduce its creative potency. The law does not evaluate the social context of the transmission, it executes the pattern. Neville's alternative is demanding enough that it will challenge every social conditioning you possess. He is not asking you to lie to your friends or to perform false cheerfulness. He is asking you to develop a new relationship with your own narrative, to become someone who speaks from within the override rather than from within the fact. What does this look like in practice? It looks like redirecting conversations about your current difficulties toward the language of the desired outcome. Not defensively or evasively, but naturally, as someone whose genuine inner reality is the override. It looks like treating the fact as already past, already overwritten, when it arises as the subject of conversation, and referring to it in the past tense if you must refer to it at all. It looks like developing the habit of speaking about your life the way you would speak about it if the override had already fully rendered, with the casual confidence of someone who has arrived, not the hopeful tension of someone who is still waiting. The people around you may find this confusing or even suspicious. Some will challenge you with the logic of the visible facts. But the thinker who has mastered this understands that the pushback is simply an external echo of the same reality check trap operating through social channels and treats it accordingly, with the calm authority of one who knows the law and is not asking anyone's permission to execute it. There is a third fatal mistake that manifests with particular frequency among those who have begun to understand the override intellectually, but have not yet developed the emotional discipline to sustain it under pressure. It is the mistake of attempting to solve the problem at the level of the problem. The instinctive turn toward external action, strategy, and problem solving at the precise moment when the override requires inner stillness and the sustained maintenance of the new blueprint. When the physical conditions worsen, when the debt increases, when the symptoms become more pronounced, when the rejection becomes more definitive, the conditioned response is to escalate the external effort, make more calls, research more solutions, draft more plans, consult more experts. None of this is inherently wrong as a category of activity. The error is in the inner posture from which it arises. When external action is taken from within the panic of the unchanged physical condition, when it is driven by the emotional weight of a fact that has been given full causative authority, the action is generated by the old blueprint and will, in the vast majority of cases, produce outcomes that are in correspondence with that blueprint. The action is not the override. The override is the inner command. The action that follows from within the override, action taken from a state of inner certainty, of assumed accomplishment, of natural unfoldment, is of an entirely different quality and produces outcomes of an entirely different order. The precise test for whether an external action is arising from the override or from the fact is the emotional state in which you undertake it. If the action is driven by anxiety, by the desperation of someone who does not believe the override is sufficient and who is frantically supplementing it with external effort in case the law fails to deliver, that action is not aligned with the override. It is a creative transmission of doubt, broadcasting the signal that you do not actually believe the blueprint you have installed. The law reads this transmission accurately and executes it accordingly. Conversely, if the action arises from within the assumption of the override already accomplished, if you are making the call or writing the proposal from inside the consciousness of someone who already has what they are moving toward, taking inspired, naturally arising steps that feel like the obvious next moves of a person in the override, then that action is an expression of the override, not a compensation for it. It adds momentum rather than confusion to the creative process. Learning to distinguish between these two sources of action, and learning to act only from the first, is one of the most precise and most powerful refinements available to the serious practitioner of this teaching. The seventh fatal mistake, more subtle than the previous ones, and perhaps more destructive precisely because of its subtlety, is the mistake of holding the override as a performance rather than a truth. This is the state in which the thinker goes through the motions of the protocol, closes the eyes, constructs the scene, generates the words of the assumption, while privately, in the deepest layer of their consciousness, maintaining a belief in the superior reality of the fact. The visualization is performed, but it is performed with the emotional flavor of a performance, as something done in the hope that it will work, not from the authority of a thinker who knows the law and is issuing a command with full confidence. This performance quality override is not the same instruction as the genuine override, and it does not produce the same results, not because the law is evaluating the sincerity of your effort, but because the deepest operative assumption, the one transmitted at the level of feeling rather than the level of words, is still the fact. The thinker believes the fact is real and the override is aspirational. That belief is the blueprint that the law executes. The override is a conscious aspiration layered on top of an unconscious conviction of limitation, and the unconscious conviction will always outweigh the conscious aspiration in the competition for causative authority. The correction for this is not more intense visualization. It is the deeper, more patient, more honest work of genuinely shifting the level at which you hold the override as true, not as something you are trying to believe, but as something you know with the same effortless certainty with which you know your own name. Of all the instructions Neville Goddard ever issued, across decades of lectures, dozens of books and thousands of hours of teaching, there is one command that stands above all others in its precision, its brevity, and its architectural completeness. It is the command that encodes the entire override methodology in two paired directives, each one pointing to the exact mechanism that the other implies. Leave the mirror, Neville says, and change your face. Leave the world alone and change your conceptions of yourself. These two sentences are not metaphors in the loose, decorative sense. They are precise operational instructions for the management of the creative process, instructions that, if followed with the exactitude they demand, constitute a complete technology of transformation. Leave the mirror. Examine this first directive with the precision it deserves. The mirror is not merely a reflective surface. In Neville's framework, the mirror is the entire apparatus of physical reality in its role as feedback device. The world, your bank account, your relationships, your body, your career, the social responses of those around you, is a mirror. It reflects back to you the pattern you have been holding in imagination. It shows you your face, the specific, concrete, three-dimensional expression of your current predominant self-conception, and the natural, conditioned, almost irresistible response of the conscious mind, upon seeing something in the mirror that it does not like, is to attempt to change the reflection, to argue with the mirror, to cajole the mirror, to try, through external effort and manipulation of physical circumstances, to alter what the mirror shows. Leave the mirror. Stop attempting to change the reflection. The reflection is effect. It is not the cause of anything. It cannot be changed at the level of the reflection, because the reflection is downstream of the cause, and the cause is interior. No effort applied to the surface of the mirror, however sustained and however earnest, will permanently alter the reflection, because the reflection is generated by the face, and the face in this framework is your deep, operative, felt conception of yourself. Change your face. This is the instruction that the first directive is pointing toward. The face is your self-concept, the specific, felt, emotionally real sense of who you are, what you are worth, what you are capable of, and what is available to you in this world. This self-concept is not merely a belief in the cognitive sense. It is a living, operative blueprint that the universal law is continuously executing. Your experienced reality, in every detail and every dimension, is the three-dimensional mirror image of this blueprint. Change the blueprint, and the mirror has no choice but to show you a new face. Not gradually, not approximately, not with certain exceptions for particularly entrenched physical facts, but with the complete, mathematically certain correspondence that is the signature of an immutable law operating without exception. The override protocol is, at its deepest level, a technology for changing the face, for revising the self-concept at the level of felt reality, not merely at the level of intellectual affirmation, and watching, with the calm certainty of the initiated thinker, as the mirror adjusts its reflection in perfect and inevitable correspondence. Leave the world alone. This is perhaps the most radical instruction in the history of spiritual teaching, and it is radical precisely because it is so precise. Not improve the world, not work with the world, not navigate the world more cleverly. Leave it alone. Release it from the task of confirming your override before you will believe in it. Release it from the obligation of rearranging itself on your schedule. Release it from the role of arbiter of your creative power. The world is the mirror. The mirror does not need your attention, your effort, or your emotional investment. It needs from you only the revised face, the new blueprint, and it will take care of the rest of its job with complete mechanical precision, because that is the only thing it has ever been capable of doing. The effort you have been pouring into changing the world, into arguing with the fact, into solving the problem at the level of the problem, into negotiating with circumstances that were assembled from your own past thinking, has not been wasted through bad luck or insufficient effort. It has been misapplied. It has been directed at the output when it should have been directed at the input. Leave the world alone is the instruction to redirect that effort, permanently and completely, to the one activity that actually generates change. The deliberate revision of your self-conception in the imagination. Change your conceptions of yourself. This final directive is the complete specification of the override. Notice that Neville does not say, change your thoughts about your situation. He does not say, think positive thoughts about your desired outcome. He says, change your conceptions of yourself. The operative level is not circumstance, it is identity. The thinker who attempts to override poverty by imagining a specific large sum of money is working at the level of circumstance. The thinker who overrides poverty by revising their deep operative self-concept from a person who struggles financially to a person who naturally and inevitably attracts and manages wealth is working at the level of identity. And the law responds to identity at a more fundamental and more pervasive level than it responds to circumstantial desires, because identity is the blueprint from which all circumstances are generated. If you change your self-conception at the deepest level of felt reality, if you genuinely, in the privacy of your own imagination, know yourself to be the person who has abundance, health, love, success, the circumstances are not one thing you then have to work to produce. They are the automatic, mechanically inevitable output of the operative self-concept. They follow as naturally and as inevitably as the reflection follows the face. The practical implication of this command for your override practice is this. Your visualizations should always be grounded in a revision of self-concept rather than in the external acquisition of things. The scene you construct should not be a scene of receiving something from outside yourself. It should be a scene in which you are being the person, fully naturally without strain or effort, who already has the thing as a natural expression of who they are. The successful entrepreneur sitting at the desk of their company is not receiving success from outside. They are expressing success from inside. The scene is not about the desk. The desk is merely the outward detail of an inner identity. What the injection is installing at its deepest level is not a circumstance. It is a self, a new, revised, operationally real conception of who you are and what is natural to you. When that installation is complete, when the self-concept has genuinely shifted, The world will not gradually and reluctantly change to accommodate your desire. It will instantly and inevitably reflect the new face, because the new face is what the mirror always shows. This is Neville's command. This is the master's instruction. And it is the most precise, most powerful, and most complete statement of the override that has ever been articulated. The teachings of Neville Goddard, when encountered for the first time, can appear to occupy a category that the scientific mind classifies as mysticism, inspiring, perhaps poetically beautiful, possibly but ultimately unverifiable, and therefore not requiring serious engagement from anyone committed to an evidence-based understanding of reality. This categorization is a mistake, and it is a mistake with a precisely identifiable origin. The failure to recognize that the mechanism Neville described with the language of metaphysics has been independently and exhaustively documented by the neuroscientific community under a different name and with a different vocabulary. The correspondence is not approximate, it is structural, and when it is examined with the precision it deserves, what emerges is not a comfortable parallel between two separate fields. It is the recognition that Neville and modern neuroscience were describing the same phenomenon from the same depth of the same reality, one with the language of mystical instruction and one with the language of cellular biology. The first and most direct bridge between Neville's override methodology and modern neuroscience is the phenomenon of neuroplasticity. For most of the 20th century, the same century in which Neville was delivering his lectures, neuroscience operated under the assumption that the adult brain was essentially fixed. Its structure was believed to be determined by genetics and early developmental experiences, and the neural connections that had been established by early adulthood were considered permanent. The brain you had at 30 was the brain you would have at 70, with some modifications for disease and aging, but none for deliberate reconstruction. This assumption has been definitively demolished by decades of research that now constitute the foundation of modern cognitive neuroscience. The adult brain is not fixed. It is continuously and actively remodeling itself in response to the patterns of thought, attention, and emotional experience that the individual sustains with consistency over time. Neural pathways that are repeatedly activated grow stronger, more efficient, and more automatically accessible. Neural pathways that are consistently neglected weaken and eventually become functionally dormant. The brain, in other words, is a physical system that is continuously being sculpted by the content of the thinker's mental life. Apply this finding to the override protocol with precision. When you perform the override, when you close your eyes, enter the injection, and fully inhabit the sensory and emotional reality of the desired outcome, you are not performing a psychological exercise that occurs entirely at the level of conscious experience. You are generating a pattern of neural activation that is physically real at the level of cellular biology. The neurons that fire in the pattern corresponding to the imagined experience are the same neurons that would fire if the experience were occurring in physical reality. The brain does not, at the level of neural activation, distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physically occurring one. From the perspective of the neural architecture, they are the same event. This means that every repetition of the override injection is not merely a revisitation of a desired idea. It is a physical reconstruction of the neural infrastructure of the person who lives in that desired reality. Each session literally changes the physical structure of the brain in the direction of the override, making the neural patterns corresponding to the new reality stronger, more automatic, and more accessible, while the neural patterns corresponding to the old fact weaken through progressive disuse. The implications for the true fast are equally precise. When Neville instructs you to withdraw your attention from the unwanted condition, to stop feeding it, to refuse to rehearse it in your inner conversation, to abstain from the emotional experience of the problem, he is, from the neurological perspective, instructing you to begin the process of neural pathway atrophy for the circuits that correspond to the old blueprint. Neural pathways are maintained by activation. They are weakened by consistent non-activation. The habitual thought patterns, emotional responses, and perceptual filters that support your unwanted conditions are not mystical forces. They are physical neural structures in your brain. They are networks of synaptic connections that have been strengthened by years of repeated activation, by every worried thought, every fearful projection, every resigned acceptance of the fact. The true fast at the neurological level is the practice of deliberately withholding the activation that maintains these networks. Every day of the fast, the old neural circuits weaken by precisely the amount that corresponds to the activation they have not received. And every day of the override practice, the new circuits, the ones corresponding to the desired reality, are strengthened by precisely the amount that corresponds to the activation they have received. The second neuroscientific pillar of validation for the override is the reticular activating system, a network of neurons located in the brainstem that functions as the brain's most powerful filtering mechanism. The RAS is responsible for determining, from the approximately 11 million bits of sensory information that your nervous system processes every second, which approximately 40 bits are elevated to the level of conscious awareness. The selection criteria for this filtering are not random. The RAS filters sensory input according to what you have established through repeated mental and emotional focus as significant, relevant, and worth attending to. In other words, the RAS does not show you the world as it is. It shows you a highly filtered version of the world that has been curated to match the dominant patterns in your neural architecture, the patterns that your habitual thinking and emotional experience have told the system to look for. This has a precise and profound implication for the override. When your dominant mental pattern, your operative blueprint, is the old fact, your RAS filters your perceptual field to highlight every piece of sensory information that confirms and reinforces that fact, while systematically filtering out the information that does not. The person operating under the blueprint of financial lack does not see the opportunities that pass through their field of experience every day, not because the opportunities are absent, they are not, but because the RAS, calibrated to the dominant pattern of scarcity, does not elevate them to conscious attention. They are in the 11 million bits that never become the 40. When the override is installed, when the new blueprint is established as the dominant pattern through the consistent practice of the injection and the sustained boot, the RAS recalibrates. It does not recalibrate instantly, because the recalibration is a physical process of neural restructuring, but it recalibrates progressively, and as it does, the perceptual field begins to shift. The opportunities that were always there begin to appear. The people who carry the seeds of the desired outcome begin to stand out from the background of social experience. The paths that were invisible become visible, not because the external world has changed, but because the filter through which you are perceiving it has been rewritten by the override. This is the neurological mechanism behind what Neville describes as the world rearranging itself to conform to the override. The world is not in most cases presenting entirely new circumstances that did not previously exist. It is presenting the same complex field of possibilities that has always been present, but presenting it through a perceptual filter that now highlights the correspondences with the new blueprint rather than the correspondences with the old one. The phone call from the unexpected investor was always a possibility. The conversation that leads to the breakthrough was always available. The resource that resolves the problem was always there. They were invisible under the old filter. Under the new filter, the filter recalibrated by the override, they become visible, accessible, and actionable. This is not magic. This is the reticular activating system executing its function with biological precision in exact correspondence with the blueprint that the thinker has installed as the dominant pattern of their neural architecture. Neuroplasticity and the RAS are not the only scientific frameworks that validate the override. The field of psychoneuroimmunology has established that the emotional and psychological states of the individual have direct, measurable effects on immune function, hormonal regulation, and the biological processes associated with physical health. The sustained maintenance of a state of emotional conviction, inner certainty, and assumed wellness, the precise emotional state generated by a consistently held override, does not merely affect the subjective experience of the individual. It produces measurable biological changes at the cellular level. Conversely, the sustained emotional state of anxiety, despair, and the acceptance of a threatening fact The precise emotional state generated by the continued validation of an unwanted condition has been documented to suppress immune function, elevate stress hormones, and accelerate the biological processes associated with the deterioration of health. Neville's instruction to maintain the inner reality of the override, to fast from the emotional experience of the problem, is not merely a spiritual practice. It is, from the perspective of psychoneuroimmunology, the most biologically sophisticated prescription available for the support of physical health during the processing period of the override. The field of quantum physics offers a framework that is more philosophically aligned with Neville's deepest claims, specifically the claim that the consciousness of the observer is not separate from the reality being observed. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics and the observer effect in particular have been the subject of enormous popular discussion and frequent misrepresentation. But at their core, what these findings suggest is that at the fundamental level of physical reality, the boundary between the observing consciousness and the observed phenomenon is not as absolute as the classical scientific worldview assumed. The act of observation does not merely record a pre-existing physical state, it participates in the determination of that state. This is a radical departure from the classical model in which the universe exists as a fixed, objective reality, independent of and unaffected by the consciousness that observes it. The precise extent to which these quantum-level principles scale up to the macroscopic level of human experience remains a subject of active scientific inquiry and legitimate debate. But the direction in which the evidence points, that consciousness is not a passive observer of a fixed physical reality, but an active participant in the determination of physical outcomes, is fully aligned with the architecture of Neville's teaching and represents a scientific frontier whose implications are still unfolding. The scientific validation of the override is not merely a reassurance for skeptical minds. It is a deepening of the understanding of why the protocol operates as it does. Neuroplasticity explains how the consistent practice of the override physically rewires the thinker's neural architecture in the direction of the desired reality. The RAS explains how this rewiring progressively recalibrates the perceptual field to highlight the correspondences with the new blueprint. Psychoneuroimmunology explains how the sustained emotional state of the override supports the biological processes necessary for the manifestation of health. And quantum physics points toward the deeper possibility that consciousness participates in the determination of physical reality at the most fundamental level of its architecture. Together, these frameworks do not merely corroborate Neville's teaching. They reveal that what Neville called the law is not a mystical principle operating outside of nature. It is the most fundamental operating principle of nature itself, the principle by which the consciousness of the thinker and the physical world of the fact are not separate systems in a relationship of mutual influence, but aspects of a single unified process in which the invisible always precedes and determines the visible, and in which the blueprint of the imagination is, always and without exception, first cause. The neurological case for the override, taken in its entirety, amounts to this. You are not simply choosing between two different philosophies of life when you decide to execute the reality override. You are choosing between two different neurological operating systems. The first operating system is the one you have been running by default, the one in which the sensory perception of the physical world functions as the primary input to your neural processing, in which the emotional responses to external circumstances generate the dominant patterns of your neural architecture, and in which the RAS filters your perceptual field to confirm and reinforce whatever blueprint those responses have established. This is the operating system of the fact, the system in which you are reactive, in which your inner world is manufactured by your outer world, and in which the possibility of change is limited by the degree to which the physical world presents you with changed circumstances to react to. The second operating system is the override, the system in which the imagination functions as the primary input, in which the deliberate generation of the override's emotional reality generates new neural patterns regardless of what the physical world is displaying, and in which the RAS is progressively recalibrated to filter the perceptual field in correspondence with the new blueprint. This is the operating system of the thinker, the system in which you are generative, in which your outer world is assembled from the raw material of your inner world, and in which the possibility of change is limited only by the precision and consistency with which you execute the override. The evidence from neuroscience does not merely suggest that this second operating system is preferable. It demonstrates that it is operational, that the brain is physically capable of running it, that the neural mechanisms required for its execution are present and functional, and that the transition from one to the other is not a matter of genetic endowment or psychological advantage, but of deliberate, consistent, correctly directed mental practice. The person who masters the override is not a special kind of person. They are a person who has understood the architecture of the system and has chosen with full deliberateness to operate it at the level of cause rather than the level of effect. They have taken the same neurological equipment that every human being possesses and directed it with precision and with understanding toward the function it was always capable of performing. And the results, the physical realities that emerge from this correctly directed operation, are not lucky. They are not miraculous. They are the mathematically certain consequences of a system operating exactly as it was designed to operate, under the command of a thinker who finally knows what they are doing. Neville's mysticism is not a metaphor for modern neurology. It is a description of it, articulated decades before the scientific vocabulary was available to render it in those terms. When Neville said that the imagination is the first cause of all things, when he said that the inner world creates the outer, that the assumption of the wish fulfilled reorganizes the physical world in correspondence with itself, he was describing, in the language of sacred instruction, the precise phenomenon that neuroscientists now document as neuroplasticity, RAS recalibration, and the psychoneuroimmunological effects of sustained positive emotional states. The words are different. The precision is the same. The law he described is the law that science has been, step by methodical step, uncovering and confirming. And the override protocol that this channel teaches is not a departure from evidence-based understanding of how reality works. It is the most precise, the most sophisticated, and the most fully validated operational framework for the deliberate application of that understanding that has ever been assembled. There was once a man, a businessman, a founder, a person who had built something real from the ground of his own effort and intelligence, who found himself standing in an office that had become the physical embodiment of everything Neville Goddard meant by the word fact. The eviction notices were real. The zero in the bank account was real. The silence of former partners was real. The legal documents accumulating on the desk were real. Every piece of paper in that room, every number on every statement, every unopened envelope in the mail stack was a fact, documented, dated, legally binding, and perfectly aligned in its testimony. This is finished. Every person in the man's life who operated by the logic of the screen, who read the display and drew their conclusions from it, was saying the same thing, in their own language, with the same quiet certainty. The game is over. Respond to the facts. Call the lawyer. Begin the unwinding process. Accept what is. He did not accept what is. Not because he was in denial. He was not a man given to self-deception. Not because he lacked the intelligence to read the documents. He read them, and he knew exactly what they said. But he had encountered Neville's teaching at a depth that had changed the architecture of his understanding, and he knew something that the documents did not, that facts are effects, and that the effect cannot override the cause he was capable of installing in the silence of his own mind. So he sat in the office that the eviction notice said would soon belong to someone else, and he executed the override. He closed his eyes. He disconnected from every document, every number, every silent phone, every empty chair where partners used to sit. He entered the void. And then he constructed, with the full precision and full sensory authority of the injection, a single scene. He felt the handshake, not a generic handshake, a specific one, the weight of it, the firmness of it, the particular quality of a handshake exchanged between two people who have just agreed on something that will change both of their trajectories. He heard the word congratulations. He heard it in the specific register of someone who was saying it because they meant it, because they were genuinely excited about what had just been agreed. He held the scene, and he held the feeling, the complete, full-bodied, emotionally real feeling of a man who had just solved the problem that every piece of paper in the room said was unsolvable. He did not open the mail. This detail is not incidental. It is the precise expression of the true fast in the face of maximum sensory pressure. The mail contained more facts. The mail contained more documents that would, if opened, demand to be registered as real, demand emotional response, demand that the screen-reading function of the mind be activated and the loading screen interpreted as evidence of permanent failure. He recognized the mail for what it was, the loading screen of an update in progress, not evidence of a permanent state, not a command requiring obedience, temporary data from a system that was already being overwritten. He left it on the desk. He walked through the office with the inner orientation of the sustained boot, through the physical space that the document said belonged to the past. From within the consciousness of the man in the handshake scene, the man who had just been congratulated, the man whose override was not a hope but a known law in motion. Within a week, 7 days, the precise duration of which is as significant for its brevity as for its content, the phone rang. The caller was a man the businessman had not spoken to in years, not a contact he had reached out to in desperation, not a person he had targeted as part of a plan constructed by the problem-solving mind reacting to the facts, not the result of any external action he had taken in response to the eviction notices. A person from the outer edges of his professional history who had, for reasons he could articulate only in hindsight, thought of the businessman at precisely the right moment and decided to call. The conversation that followed produced an offer, a partnership, a financial arrangement that did not merely address the immediate crisis. It wiped the debt and expanded the company to a scale that the previous version of the business, the version that had existed before the crisis, had not achieved. The facts that had been stacked on the desk, the eviction notices, the legal documents, the zero bank balance, were not resolved through the mechanisms those facts had suggested. They were bypassed. The override did not fix the old situation. It rendered a new one, a situation that belonged to a different order of possibility than the one implied by the facts, a situation that the facts had declared impossible and that the law had made inevitable. This is what the override does when it is executed correctly and completely and without the self-sabotage of the reality check trap. It does not argue with the facts. It does not fix the old situation. It bypasses it, not through magical intervention, not through the suspension of physical law, but through the precise, mechanically sound operation of a higher law, the law that the imagination of the thinker is first cause, that the blueprint held with sufficient conviction and clarity will be executed by the universal substance, regardless of what the current physical conditions suggest about its probability, and that the physical world, however imposing its facts, however accumulated its evidence, however unanimous the testimony of the loading screen, will always, in the end, and with the mathematical certainty of an immutable principle, conform to the command that has been issued from the server of the thinker's imagination. He bypassed the fate that was written on paper. He wrote a new one. He wrote it in the silence of his mind, with the ink of felt conviction and the authority of a man who knew the law. The world had no choice but to honor what he had written. You have now received the complete architecture of the reality override. You understand at a depth that renders the old confusion permanently obsolete, the distinction between a fact and a truth. You understand that the fact is effect, the downstream crystallization of a prior mental pattern, and that the truth is cause, the living blueprint held in the imagination, which the universal law will execute with the same impartial mathematical certainty with which it has been executing the patterns you held before you understood what you were doing. You understand the server architecture of reality, that the physical world is the device running the old application, that your imagination is the server holding the new code, and that the override is the command that pushes the update, beginning the installation that the physical world will complete on its own schedule, whether or not the loading screen continues to display the old version during the processing period. You understand the true fast, the precise withdrawal of causative sustenance from the unwanted condition. the disciplined refusal to feed the old blueprint with the attention, conversation, and emotional investment that has been maintaining it. And you understand the 3 steps of the protocol: the disconnection, the injection, and the sustained boot. And you understand that the override is not a technique you perform once, but a way of walking through the world. The synthesis that emerges from this complete understanding is not merely a new set of mental tools. It is a fundamental revision of the relationship between you and reality. Reality is not, as you were trained to believe, a fixed and independent structure that exists outside of you, that was assembled before you arrived, that operates according to its own autonomous logic, and that you must navigate, negotiate, and adapt to as best you can with the limited power of your individual will. This was never true. It felt true because you were operating the system backwards, receiving the output of the creation process as though it were the input, and then generating your inner reality in reactive correspondence with it, thereby perpetuating the cycle indefinitely. The cycle felt like fate. It felt like external forces organizing your experience without your consent. It felt like the evidence that you were a small person in a large and indifferent universe. None of this was the truth. All of it was the consequence of a misunderstanding about the direction of causation, a misunderstanding that the override protocol corrects with permanent and irreversible precision. Reality is not a fixed structure. It is a responsive system. It is a medium, an infinitely plastic substance that takes form in accordance with the pattern that the thinker holds as their operative truth. It has always been this. It will always be this. The evidence for its fixedness, the bank account, the diagnosis, the rejection, the circumstances that seem to resist every effort you make to change them. This evidence is not a refutation of the responsive nature of reality. It is, paradoxically, the most powerful confirmation of it. The fixed circumstances are fixed because a fixed pattern is being held in the imagination and continuously transmitted to the universal substance as the operative blueprint. The world is not refusing to change. The world is changing continuously, and it is changing with perfect responsiveness and mathematical precision in exact correspondence with what you have been commanding it to become. The only thing that has been required to produce different results is a different command. And the override protocol is the technology of issuing that different command with the precision and sustained authority that the law requires for complete execution. The withdrawal of your agreement from a physical reality is the most powerful act available to a conscious being. Reality, at every level and in every dimension, is maintained not by external forces that impose it upon you, but by your continued, moment-by-moment agreement with it. Your agreement is its sustenance. Your attention is its fuel. Your emotional investment is its creative force. When you withdraw all 3, when you remove the agreement, redirect the attention, and relocate the emotional investment in the override, the existing reality is not merely left without a champion. It is deprived of the only energy source that was maintaining it. It begins, immediately and inexorably, to lose the coherence that your attention was providing. And the new reality, receiving the full force of the creative investment that the old one has surrendered, begins, immediately and inexorably, to take form in the substance of the universal medium. The tipping point between the old and the new is not a dramatic moment. It is the quiet, precise, barely noticeable instant when the weight of your genuine inner conviction has shifted from the fact to the override. That is the moment the installation completes. That is the moment the new version begins to render. And from that moment, the physical world's cooperation is not a possibility. It is a certainty. It is law. The architecture of reality has been, from the first moment of your existence, entirely in your hands. Not partially in your hands. Not in your hands when the circumstances are favorable and out of your hands when they are not. Entirely, always without exception in your hands, in the creative instrument of your imagination, in the blueprint of your self-concept, in the operative assumption of what you take to be true about yourself and your world. The chaos in your life, the debt, the illness, the loneliness, the stalled career, was not sent to you. It was built by you, through the unconscious operation of a creative process you did not know you were running. This is not blame. It is empowerment of the highest possible order. Because if you built it, you can override it. Because if unconscious creation produced the current conditions, then deliberate creation. Creation executed with full knowledge of the law, full precision in the protocol, and full authority in the command will produce entirely different ones. The initiation you have received in this video is not information. It is the transfer of operational authority. It is the moment the thinker understands, at a depth that changes everything, that they were always the first cause. The entire reality around them was always their architecture. It was always their blueprint. It was always their override to write. Stop being bullied by pieces of paper. Let this instruction land with the full weight of its precision. The bank statement is paper. The diagnosis is paper. The rejection letter is paper. The eviction notice, the overdue invoice, the legal document, the failed test result, they are paper. They are the physical residue of past thinking, given the form of institutional authority and the weight of social agreement, and presented to you as though they were the voice of the universe pronouncing judgment on your life. They are not. They are effects masquerading as causes. They are the mirror showing you yesterday's face and asking you to call it today's. You have been yielding to them. You have been treating their testimony as final. And in yielding to them, in giving them the emotional and creative investment of your ongoing belief, you have been the one who maintained their authority, not the universe, not fate, not an external power beyond your reach. You, the living, conscious, operant thinker, who is the only first cause that has ever operated in your experience. You have been maintaining your own prison by continuing to agree that the walls are real. The walls are not real, or rather, they are real in exactly the degree that you have made them real through the sustained creative investment of your agreement. And they will cease to be real in exactly the degree that you withdraw that investment and relocate it in the override. You are not a small person in a large universe. You are the consciousness through which this universe, in your experience, is continuously being created. The universe does not experience itself independently of your perception of it. In your experience, it exists through and in accordance with the blueprint you are transmitting. This is not narcissism. It is the precise statement of a metaphysical fact that has been corroborated by the scientific evidence we reviewed. Your perceptual field is constructed by your neural architecture. Your neural architecture is sculpted by your habitual patterns of thought and emotion, and the physical reality you navigate is filtered, shaped, and to a profound degree determined by the system of assumptions you carry as your operative truth. You are not receiving a reality. You are generating one. Every moment, every day, without interruption and without exception. The only question is whether you are generating it consciously or unconsciously. You are the living operant power. This phrase is Neville's, and it is not a comfort. It is a charge, a precise description of what you are and a demand for the level of responsibility that corresponds to it. An operant power is not a power that is subject to the conditions it encounters. It is not a power that can be overruled by circumstances. It is not a power that depends on the cooperation of the external world for its effectiveness. It is the power that causes, that establishes the pattern, transmits the blueprint, issues the override, and waits with the calm certainty of the initiated for the law to execute what it has been commanded to execute. You are this power. You have always been this power. And every moment that you spend in the posture of a victim of circumstance, every moment that you yield to the authority of a fact, every moment that you allow the evidence of the senses to determine the content of your inner world, you are exercising this power. You are exercising it in the direction of creating more of what you do not want. Awakening to your nature as the operant power does not give you new power. It redirects the power you have always had. It turns the creator of problems into the creator of solutions. Not by changing the power, but by changing the command. Override the code. This is the precise instruction. Not hope for a better outcome. Not believe more strongly. Not stay positive. Override. This is an act of authority. It is the conscious, deliberate exercise of the creative power that constitutes your essential nature as a being of imagination. It is the refusal to accept a dead fact as a living truth. It is the installation, with full precision and full authority, of a new blueprint in the command terminal of your mind. It is the exercise of what Neville called the assumption of the wish fulfilled, not as a wish, not as a hope, but as an assumption, a thing taken as already true, already real, already the operative foundation from which your consciousness is now proceeding. When you assume, you do not wait for evidence. When you assume, you proceed from the assumption as your starting point, and the world governed by the law assembles itself in correspondence with that starting point. The override is the assumption is the override, and the power to assume is the most supreme creative faculty that the universe has deposited in a conscious being. Ignore the facts, say it again, not as a mantra, but as an operational directive. Ignore them, not because they are not there, not because they are not pressing, not because they are not carrying the full weight of social and institutional authority behind them. They are there, they are pressing, they carry that weight, and you are ignoring them, precisely, deliberately, and with the full understanding of what they actually are. Effects that were produced by the pattern of your past thinking, and effects that have no power to prevent the results of your new pattern from manifesting. You are not ignoring facts because you are a fool. You are ignoring them because you are an engineer who understands that the loading screen contains no information about the quality of the code currently installing. The loading screen is old. The new code is already running in the server. You have issued the override. You are walking through the processing period in the consciousness of the new reality. The facts are the loading screen. You are giving them the precise amount of attention that an engineer gives a loading screen. None. Claim your kingdom in the silence of your mind. This is the precise location of the override, not in the volume of your declarations, not in the confidence of your public persona, not in the external performance of a success that has not yet appeared on the screen. In the silence, in the private sovereign architecture of your own imagination, the one place in the universe where the law operates most directly, where the substance is most immediately responsive, and where the blueprint you hold with sufficient conviction is already, in the deepest sense of the word, manifested. The kingdom is yours the moment you claim it in the silence. The physical world will follow. It always has. It always will. The only thing it knows how to do is mirror the inner. And the moment the inner is yours, the outer has already received its next instruction. Watch the world rearrange itself, not with the anxious checking eye of someone waiting to see if their prayer was heard. With the calm, knowing attention of an architect walking the site of their next building, noting with satisfaction, but without surprise, as the stones begin to fall into place exactly where the blueprint specified they would go. You are not waiting for permission. You are not waiting for circumstances to improve sufficiently that faith feels reasonable. Faith is not reasonable from within the old paradigm. It never was. It was never designed to be. It was designed to be the operating principle of a consciousness that has moved beyond the paradigm of screen reading into the paradigm of blueprint writing. The consciousness that does not require the physical world to confirm the override before proceeding. You do not need the facts to cooperate. You do not need the circumstances to ease. You do not need the people around you to believe in the override. You need only the silence of your own mind, the authority of your own imagination, and the knowing, the deep, architecturally complete, law-based knowing that the command you have issued will be executed. Because the law is exact, because the law has no exceptions, because the law has been faithfully executing every command you have ever issued, and this new command, issued with greater precision and greater authority than any you have issued before, will be executed with the same faithful exactness. Watch the world violently rearrange itself to crown you, not eventually. Now, the override is in progress. The initiation you have received in this video is not academic. It was not designed to be stored in memory as interesting information about an unusual thinker from the 20th century. It was designed to be applied, to be taken from the screen on which you are watching it and inserted with immediate precision into the architecture of your daily consciousness. And to ensure that this application begins today, before the conditioned mind can interpose its arguments and return you to the comfortable passivity of screen reading, This channel is issuing what it calls the Fact-Free Day Challenge. For the next 24 hours, beginning from the moment this video ends, you are formally and deliberately forbidden from validating your biggest problem. This is not a guideline or a suggestion. It is the first test of the override protocol in the specific conditions of your actual life. The conditions that are the most entrenched, the most loaded with historical evidence, and the most heavily trafficked by your habitual inner narrative. Here is the precise protocol of the fact-free day. Identify before you proceed the single fact in your life that has the most authority over your consciousness. The one condition that, when it arises in your awareness, most reliably triggers the full mechanism of acceptance, despair, and validation. Name it. Know it specifically. And then make this commitment. For 24 hours, every time this fact presents itself to your awareness, whether in the form of a physical reminder, a thought that arises unbidden, a conversation that turns toward it, or an impulse to check the screen for its current status, you will respond with a single precise statement, spoken in the authority of the override. That is old data. It has already been overwritten. You will not argue with it. You will not try to solve it. You will not discuss it. You will not meditate anxiously upon it. You will classify it with immediate and clinical precision as what it actually is, the loading screen of an installation that is already in progress. And you will redirect your awareness, deliberately and without drama, to the inner reality of your override. This 24-hour exercise is not a cure. It is not a guarantee of instant physical manifestation. It is something more important than either of those. It is the first practice of a new neural pattern. It is the first time you will consciously, deliberately, and consistently exercise the authority of the thinker in the presence of the conditions that have historically commanded your surrender. And what you will discover if you execute it faithfully is not magical, it is neurological. You will discover that the fact, deprived of your emotional investment for 24 consecutive hours, carries less weight at the end of those hours than it did at the beginning. Not because it has changed in the physical world, but because the neural pathway that connects the fact to the cascade of fear, acceptance, and creative reinvestment in the old blueprint has been activated less frequently, and the neural pathway that connects the appearance of the fact to the calm, authoritative response of the override has been activated more. The brain has begun in a small but measurable way to rewire in the direction of the thinker rather than the reactor. One day, the first day, the beginning of the permanent transition, the world needs more than the passive consumption of good ideas. The world changes when individuals take the precise knowledge of the law and apply it with the full authority of conscious creation. When they stop negotiating with the loading screen and start issuing overrides from the server. You are one of those individuals now, not because you watched a video, because you have received, at the architectural level, the understanding that changes the operating system. The question is only whether you will act from this understanding or allow the conditioned mind to absorb it as an interesting concept and gradually return you to the default mode of screen reading. That question is yours to answer, but the law is ready. The substance is responsive. The protocol is in your hands, and there has never been a single moment in the history of your experience when the override was unavailable to you. The difference now is that you know it. If what you have encountered in this video has shifted something in the architecture of your understanding, subscribe to Sacred Logic, not to consume more content in the passive mode, but to continue the initiation. This channel exists to deliver, with the precision and the uncompromising exactness that the law deserves, the complete operational framework for the conscious exercise of your creative power. Every video is a new layer of the blueprint. Every teaching is a deeper penetration into the architecture of the law. The source code of reality is not hidden from the one who is willing to look with the right instrument. And the right instrument is not the eyes that read the facts from the screen. It is the imagination that writes the blueprint before the screen has anything to display. Subscribe to Sacred Logic, master the source code, and execute the override.